Christina is the coordinator of the Clallam County Noxious Weed Control Program. Prior to accepting that position in the spring of 2022, she worked in the fields of native plant propagation and restoration ecology. She has a master's in sustainable forest management from Oregon State University and has worked at native plant nurseries and restoration projects in Washington State, California, and North Carolina. Although she now spends most of her time killing weeds and educating other people about the importance of killing weeds, and she loves doing that, she also enjoys discussing native plants and takes way too many pictures of pollinators on native plants.
Thank you for having me speak today. So today I'm going to talk about a wetland mitigation site where we were attempting to create a native wetland in an area that was dominated by reed canarygrass, and kind of the surprising success that we had for that. Okay, so this wetland mitigation project was part of the Lower Dungeness Levee Setback and Floodplain Restoration Project, which I'm sure some of you are already familiar with. So just a quick recap. This project occurred between River Mile 0.8 and River Mile 2.7. So it's pretty close to the mouth of the Dungeness River in eastern Clallam County, a few miles north of the city of Sequim. And this area was homesteaded by dairy farmers who converted the floodplain into pasture. In the 1960s, a levee was built right along the Dungeness River to prevent the river from flooding that area, which prevented the farms and homes from being flooded, but obviously caused the river to be channelized and reduced the amount of floodplain vegetation and habitat that was available to fish and other wildlife. And so a number of different partner organizations came together to figure out a way to open up the floodplain, hoping to increase the habitat for salmon and other fish. After many years of outreach to the public and acquiring land, the project has been able to set back the levee and reconnect the river with 180 acres of its floodplain. And so again, this project was a real community effort, and there have been a lot of different organizations and government agencies involved. And the two organizations that are leading this effort are the Jamestown Clallam Tribe, which took the lead in the southern part of the project, and the Clallam County Department of Community Development, which took the lead in the northern part of the project. So even though these two agencies were the ones leading the project, there were 4 different organizations that own land within project boundaries. In addition to Clallam County and Jamestown Clallam Tribe, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife also owns a lot of land, as does the Washington Department of Transportation, who has some wetland mitigation sites out there. And my organization, the Clallam County Noxious Weed Control Board, we performed weed control primarily for county and tribally owned lands. The last year we did a little bit of weed control for WDFW. And so we were really excited to be able to do a coordinated weed control effort throughout this project. Obviously, the site has had a lot of land uses over the years, and the river is obviously bringing down a lot of weed seeds. So we had some significant weed populations that we were dealing with. The biggest one that we were dealing with was poison hemlock, especially in the northern section of this project. And the Noxious Weed Control Board has been working on the site for years to get that under control. But the other weeds that we were working with were common teasel, Himalayan blackberry, Bohemian knotweed, butterfly bush, and reed canarygrass. And for today, I'm going to focus on some of the efforts that we did for reed canarygrass. Reed canarygrass is a Class C noxious weed. And so a little background, a noxious weed is a non-native plant that, when established, is highly destructive, competitive, and difficult to control. And invasive plants that are designated noxious weeds by the Washington State Noxious Weed Board, so it is a legal term. And so while reed canarygrass is widespread and there's no way to ever be able to eradicate it from the state, we do recommend control of it in high priority areas. Now, reed canarygrass is actually native to North America, and there were native stands of it on the peninsula. But pretty much everything that we see nowadays is actually the highly invasive Eurasian genotype that was brought over in order to be used as forage, even though animals can only eat it very early in the spring. Otherwise, it's too tough for anybody to use. So this plant, even though it's native, it's acting differently than it used to, and has invaded new areas since this Eurasian genotype was introduced. And there's no way to tell the native genotype from the invasive genotype without genetic testing, and they interbreed. So there's probably very little of the native genotype left on the peninsula or anywhere in North America. So wheat canary grass, it's a perennial grass that forms these really dense monocultures that outcompetes all other native plants. And these stands, again, are not really utilized by wildlife. The grass can only be eaten for a very short time in the spring before it gets too tough. And we really don't see a lot of wildlife using these stands like you would other plants that grow in wetlands. And it can completely choke out small streams, making them unusable for fish. So wheat canary grass spreads by seeds and by underground stems called rhizomes. And these rhizomes really form a dense mat underground that prevent any other plants from coming up. And you can't get a shovel through it. It's really dense. And the seeds will remain viable in the soil for over 20 years. Because of this really dense rhizome network and the fact that there's a really long seed bank in there, this is a really difficult plant to control. And for the most part, control is done through herbicide or trying to shade it out, since it seems to grow best in wet and sunny locations. But control is really difficult, and it can take many years to occur, if it even occurs at all. Okay, so now that we've done a little background information on the project and wheat canary grass, let's talk about this specific site and what happened there. For this project, the county hired a private contractor to build a new levee, which is, you can see on the screen, it's kind of snaking through the middle of the picture. This part of the levee goes through WSDOT mitigation sites, and so it was very important that the construction crew stay within the really narrow footprint. But on the first day of their construction in September of 2021, they accidentally left that footprint and bulldozed an area that had been planted as part of a WSDOT mitigation site. And I've highlighted it on the left side of the photo. In order to make up for that, the contractor had to replant that area that was bulldozed. And then they also had to create a half-acre wetland that was originally pure wheat canary grass, and they had to make it mostly natives. And so that was that site was chosen. It's about 1,500 feet away. I've labeled it in the middle of it, and it's in this picture, it's highlighted by the orange silting fence. And so there's another scraped area in between that, and I'll talk about that site at the end. And this picture was taken the end of December of 2022. So in November, the two levees were connected, and then in December, the whole area got flooded. So it was really fun to see this project be successful almost right away. So the creation of this half-acre wetland occurred in the middle of the May. And because wheat canary grass is so difficult to control, the previous coordinator for Clallam County Noxious Weed Control Board, Kathy Lucero, she convinced county engineers who wrote the construction contract to require the contractor to manually remove wheat canary grass within the footprint of the levee and anywhere that we're going to be working. And so what the contractor did was they used a backhoe to scrape the top foot of the wheat canary grass out. And so that includes all the top growth and all the rhizomes and the seed bank that's underneath it. And so they would take that top foot of topsoil and rhizomes, they would put it in a get rid of it, and it was getting hauled off site to an old county pit that we were trying to fill in. That's what the contractor did to create this half-acre wetland. And unfortunately, I don't have any before pictures of the site. I'm sure somebody does. But this is the picture while they were doing that on the left. You can see that on the left-hand side of the picture, I pointed out where the wheat canary grass is. That was the entire site. It was just covered in wheat canary grass. As part of this mitigation requirements, the contractor had to install a bunch of these mounds and plant native species on it. They planted 6 different native species on the mounds, 1 plant of each one. But that turned out to be unnecessary, and I'll show you why. And then the contractor also spread out a bunch of native seed, but that also turned out to be pretty unnecessary too. Okay, so the picture on the left, you can see that another part of this project that was really important is that this site was completely surrounded by either willows or cottonwoods. Willows and cottonwoods, they drop their seeds in early June usually, and the seeds are only viable for a couple of weeks. And so the willow and cottonwood seeds have to drop down onto wet, bare soil right away in order to germinate and live. Otherwise, those seeds die. There's no seed bank for those. Well, luckily, this site was created in the middle of May, and so there was a lot of bare ground available in June, and you can see that on the right. So that's what the site looked like right after they were completed. Even in June, this site was really flooded, and it stayed flooded for most of the time. So this is the site 2 months later, and so although this site was seeded, I didn't see any of the species from that seed mix come up. Instead, all the seeds that were sitting in the soil under the reed canarygrass and under those rhizomes, they all started to germinate in really amazing numbers. So within 2 months, this site became dominated by cattails, small flowered bulrush, horsetails, obviously, and other rushes and sedges. And because there was all this bare ground that was available when the cottonwoods and the willows were dropping their seeds, we just had thousands and thousands of these willows come up in the site. And on the right-hand picture, I've pointed out some of the willow cottonwood seedlings. There has to be at least 100 or 200 of them just in that frame of that picture. There was so many of them, and it was really amazing and remarkable how quickly the native plants came up and kind of took over this site. Oh, so my crew and I only performed one weed treatment on this site. It was in September of 2022, and it was pretty minimal. Of course, because the site is still surrounded by reed canarygrass, and the only thing in between the reed canarygrass and the mitigation site is the silt fencing. Obviously, the reed canarygrass is creeping underneath the silt fencing and spreading back into the site. So we did treat the reed canarygrass that's coming up. There were a little bit that was germinating in the middle of the site. Either pieces of the rhizome had broken off and got reestablished, or there was some seeds left over. And then we also did a little bit of Canada and bull thistle, but it really took us almost no time at all. This site is really dominated by native plants, and there really wasn't a lot of non-native stuff that was in there. Okay, so here's the site of in October of 2022. So just 5 months after scraping, it is dominated by native plants. It's really just absolutely amazing. So prior to May, this site was, completely dominated by reed canarygrass and had provided almost no wildlife value or ecosystem services. And 5 months later, it is now dominated by native plants. I've never seen a restoration site respond this fast to this. It was really amazing, and it's really the only. There are still some areas around there that are dominated by native plants, but this one is really amazing, and how quickly it came back was quite unbelievable. Okay, so here's the site in fall of 2023, so just a couple of months ago, and it still looks really fantastic. My program is noxious weed control, and so we don't have the funding or the crew to do a really thorough vegetation survey on this site, but we did do a really quick survey to see what was coming up and what was growing. And so here are some of the dominant native plants that we were finding on that site. So common cattail, horsetail is obviously doing well out there. Lots of willows and cottonwoods. They're mostly the Sitka willow and the Pacific willow. We've got a lot of rushes, the native willow herb, and then soft stem and small fruited bulrush. We did do a little bit of a small amount of treatment for weeds in 2023. And again, it was mostly targeting the reed canarygrass along the edges, and then the thistles that have started to come in here. But for the most part, we weren't really needing to do that much. I think it took us maybe half an hour to walk through the site and treat stuff. It's still really dominated by native plants. So here's some of the cottonwoods and willows that have germinated on site. I figured since so much had come in last year that this spring there wouldn't be a lot of willow and cottonwood recruitment, but we did actually see another cohort come down and germinate. So now we've kind of got this two layer of the 1-year-old cottonwoods and willows, and now we have some little ones that are germinating too. The willows and cottonwoods are really dominating in areas that are a little above water. So if you think back to that picture that I showed when there weren't any plants on it, it was all dominated by water. But by the end of the season, it's mostly just the northern part that's dominated by water. The southern part is a little higher, and so is the eastern edge. And that area is definitely dominated by this willow and cottonwood germination. So I assume within a couple of years, these shrubs are going to be taking over and really dominate that part of the site. But there is still standing water, even in the dry season in the northern part of the site. And we've had very little of the willow and cottonwood recruitment there. And it's still dominated by cattails. So it looks like it's going to stay that way because of all the water that's just sitting right there. So of course, there are still some non-native plants that have come in, especially in that southern area that is really dry. And in that drier southern part, we do see a lot more of the pasture weeds like white clover, creeping buttercup, and trefoil. And then surrounding the site, especially on the northern and eastern edge, we still have these really dense stands of reed canarygrass. And you can see on the bottom of the left picture, we have Canada thistle that is also creeping underneath the fence. So Canada thistle spreads a lot like reed canarygrass, where it has these underground stems that it'll use to creep out. And then if you break off any parts of that underground stem, it'll just create a new plant. So it's really going to be a constant battle to keep those plants back and keep this little half-acre native. But it's really amazing how well this site is standing up. I thought it would have invaded a lot faster, but it's looking really good. You can see on the right-hand picture, that's a lot of that white clover that was coming in. Again, the southern part of the site is a little drier, and you're getting a little bit more of these pasture weeds coming in. Okay, so here's one of those planted mounds in fall of 2023. So this was 15 months after installation. So while most of those native plants have survived, they're pretty stunted and the horsetails have taken over. And really the mounds were the space that had the least amount of native plants. And we did see a little bit more of the weeds on those mounds. Putting in those native plants didn't hurt, but they also didn't help. So as part of that mitigation site, the contractor was required to plant Sitka spruce because it was one of the trees that WashDOT had planted at their mitigation site that they had accidentally bulldozed. Spruce doesn't really occur in the Dungeness Valley, and it doesn't like growing in wetlands or in standing water, which we have a lot of it in this area. So they've mostly died or in the process of dying. Conifers can often take a couple of years before they look like they're dead, but they're for the most part dying off there. So this is just an important reminder to think about a specific site and tailor the plants that you put there, rather than using the same species on every site. That hardly ever works. Okay, so that was the wetland mitigation site. And in that photo that I showed of the entire site, I point out there was another scraped area kind of right in between that. And so it's about 500 feet away from the wetland mitigation site. The contractor was also required to scrape another area. And they were doing that in order to remove topsoil that was contaminated with poison hemlock seeds. Side note, that did not work. And there's still a ton of poison hemlock seeds, and that did not work at all. So this site was not part of any mitigation. We were just trying to get rid of the poison hemlock seeds. So the scraping here occurred in the same way, where the contractor removed the top foot of topsoil and it was hauled off site to our old county pit. And this work occurred also in the May of 2022. So I think it was either a couple of days or maybe a week before the other site. So they were really done pretty much at the same time. So this site, while close to the wetland mitigation site, was really actually pretty different. And so it's much drier, and prior to the scraping, it was dominated by different kinds of pasture grasses like perennial ryegrass and orchard grass. And if you look kind of up against the trees, you can see that that's still all that pasture grass that's there. And there was very little reed canarygrass. There wasn't any standing water or wet soil during construction and on site. And so we didn't really see any germination from the native seed bank, and almost no recruitment from the willows and cottonwoods that are around there. You can't see in this picture, but just to the bottom right, there is actually a willow stand there. So there are willows that are really close to this site. So even though we didn't see any native seed come up, we did hydroseed the area, and it was planted with bare roots in the fall of 2022. And that's what you see growing there right now. So even though the scraping didn't lead to any native seed bank being exposed and germinating, removing the pasture grasses was actually a good thing because it gave the hydroseeding and the bare root plants an opportunity to get established. Both would have probably failed if the pasture grass had remained. Pasture grass, just your standard pasture grass, while it doesn't have those underground rhizomes like the reed canary grass, they are really thick, fibrous roots. And if anybody's tried to dig through pasture grass with a shovel, it's really difficult. And plants feel the same way. If you were just to dig a really small hole into pasture grasses and put a plant there and fill it in and walk away, chances are those pasture grass roots would come back in and choke that plant anyway. So the scraping, while not bringing in any native seed bank, was actually a good thing because it is helping our bare root plants. I'm showing this slide because it's really interesting that we had two sites that were treated the same way and that were really close to each other, but had completely different results. And it really just poses some more questions like, why didn't this scrape area have any seed bank germination? And I mean, it just poses more questions than we can answer. And so, we've been trying to debate about why that might be. And is it because there wasn't enough water in the seed bank to germinate? So again, in May, the wetland mitigation site was flooded. Here it was actually pretty dry. And so is it maybe that the soil was too dry for this native seed bank to germinate? And my best guess is no, because once the rains came, we still didn't see any native stuff come up, and we didn't see any native seed bank come up this spring either, spring of 2023. So it was, and there was still a lot of land that was exposed, and there was enough moisture. So my best guess, and it's completely a guess at this point, is that the site being drier, it had been pasture for at least 80 years. So again, there were a lot of dairy farms in this area, and they converted a lot of the shrub forest and wetlands into pasture grass. If this area had been pasture grass for at least 80 years, then any native seed that would have been in the soil would have died by this point. But the wetland area that was dominated by reed canary grass, there was obviously standing water there, and even during the summer months. And so chances are it was too wet for pasture grass, and it probably remained a native wetland for a longer time before the reed canary grass invaded and took over. So it might have allowed the native seeds to be viable because they weren't sitting underneath the reed canary grass for quite as long. We really don't know why these two sites acted differently, but I'm hoping somebody will take up the question and maybe do a little bit of research on this. So this site is open. So this is the site from, if you're standing on the levee looking back, and you can really see how the reed canary grass that got mowed down during construction has come right back up, and it's kind of surrounding this site. This is one of my favorite projects that I worked on since I started this job, and it's really inspiring. And you can see that this wetland mitigation site is just this little island of native plants. While driving on the levee in the spring, you kind of drive along and you kind of hear some birds, but not really. And then as you drive past this, there were so many frogs and birds and life in this little half-acre native wetland mitigation. And then you drive past it again and it gets quiet again. So this is a really cool site, and if anybody's on the peninsula, I really encourage you to come out and see it. It is available. So that's my talk. So I'm open to answering any questions if anybody has some.
Thanks, Christina. Can you see the Q&A box?
Oh, here we go. Okay.
Yeah, there are tons of questions.
Okay, yeah. So somebody's asked, what's the relative elevation difference between the hummocks and the hollows? The hummocks were 18 inches tall. I've got a question. Do you know how long the reed canary grass has been established on the site? I wonder if more recently established was easier to remove from bulldozing. I don't know how long it was there, but it was pretty solid reed canary grass. So I don't think it would have been, I don't think it could have gotten more established. But I am wondering if it hasn't been there for very long, if that affected whether the native seeds underneath it were still able to be viable, because at some point those seeds will die. Okay, someone asking me what the herbicide control was. So we do spot spraying, and we primarily used, it was a Mazapir. So Polaris is the brand name. And so that is it's a systemic herbicide that is works on grasses and broadleaf plants. And so we're really using that because it's the best thing to use for the breed canary grass. We use a little bit of a broadleaf herbicide just to get some of the Canada thistle because it doesn't respond as well to imazapyr. But again, spot spraying, we used very little, like ounces of herbicide, that very little was actually put in here. Okay, so someone asked, what did they do with the dirt that was removed? It was took to an old county pit and filled in. So it just got dumped into a hole in a county pit. And nothing has really come up from there. We take care of that pit and we haven't seen any of that reed canary grass come back up. Someone's asked what species were included in the seed mix, if the rushes and the sedges that popped up. I don't know what they were off the top of my head, but no, there were no rushes and sedges in that seed mix. It was like a wetland grass mix. And I can get that information for somebody, but none of the species that came up were in that grass mix. I just don't know what they are at the moment. So someone's asked how long that we're going to leave that construction fencing in place after construction. I'm not sure. So because this was a mitigation site for the contractor to make up for bulldozing it, the other part of the mitigation site, they have to do monitoring on it. And I think it's for 5 years. And so I think the fencing is going to be up there for the entirety of that monitoring so that we know where the mitigation site is and where we have to monitor, because as part of that mitigation, they had to make sure that the reed canary grass wasn't going to get over 20%, and then we needed a certain amount of cover, and we're easily doing that. My hope is that we can find some funding and we can remove more of the reed canary grass that's bordering this, and then we hopefully will take the silt fencing off of that. But the silt fencing is going to be up there for as long as we need to monitor. So it looks like someone's saying that they have a small site and was told by the city that they could not use any equipment at all on that site. I'm assuming you're talking about a wetland site. I don't know about whether what kind of regulations each city has for different wetlands. I'm sure that WASDOT also has different ones. This project had to go through a lot of permitting in order to be able to use large equipment in a wetland. And if you reach out to Clallam County Department of Community Development, Kathy Lear is the project head there that had to deal with all of the permitting in order to be able to use large equipment in a wetland. And so she might be the best one to reach out to about that. But yeah, that has to do with different regulations in different counties in the state. Okay, so someone's asked, how did the horsetails and cattails get established so quickly? Were they part of the native seed mix, part of the deep seed bank, or were there healthy populations around the edge of the treatment area? Exactly, that's really the big question. So they were not part of the native seed mix. There are not really healthy populations around it. The picture that I have here, you can really see that there aren't really any cattails directly adjacent to this site. So it's not like they also spread by rhizomes, and so it's not like they creeped in. There is a little bit of cattail on the other side of this willow on the right-hand side of the picture. But what I think is that they came through in the seed bank, and it was just really shocking how quickly these things came back up. Someone's asking if there's any nutrient replenishment done to the soil after scraping. Nope, didn't add any nutrients to this site. And it doesn't look like we need to. It seems to be that they're just doing great. The top foot of topsoil that we took out, there was really very little topsoil in it. It was almost solidly reed canary grass, rhizomes, and the seeds that were there. It really shows how damaging that plant can be. It really just smothered everything and came to dominate. And everything that was there beforehand was just sitting underneath that reed canary grass. This site, I think, is the most vivid example we have of how noxious weeds coming into a site really destroys a site and completely changes it, and how a site can rebound once these noxious weeds come out. But no, there was no nutrients that were added to this. Okay, so scraping can cause compaction, which can promote ponding in wetland conditions, but also create poor conditions. So Yeah, so as far as the compaction goes, because of how wet this site was in May and really through the entire summer, the contractor had a difficult time getting their equipment in. So there was very little equipment movable in here. They had to put down these like mats that the backhoe could get in there, and then they scraped. And once they scraped, they did not go back to the site. And I believe that was also done on the other scraping site, though mostly because we didn't want the bulldozer to accidentally bring in more poison hemlock seeds on their tires. So they tried to be very good about removing it and not going over it. I think afterwards they might have gone over it a little bit. So as far as compaction for the wetland site, I don't think that's an issue because of how wet it was and not being able to get equipment in. But that could definitely have been an issue on site too. But again, we have seen the hydroseeding come up, and the bare root plants are doing okay, and they weren't having an issue planting into it. So I don't think compaction is too much of an issue here. Okay, so the next question, was the equipment treated on site to remove any potential propagules? If so, how? Yeah, we talked to the contractor about keeping their equipment clean and making sure that they weren't moving dirt around. I would have to reach out to them to figure out if they were washing it in a specific site or if they were brushing it off. But based on the fact that they didn't spread anything into this site, at least any of the canarygrass seeds or the poison hemlock seeds that they're working with, they seem to do a pretty good job. Okay, so somebody's asked about the cultural resources review process for this project and whether there were any hesitations about using the scraping method. So again, I wasn't part of the permitting process, so I would defer that if anybody wants to reach out to Clallam County Department of Community Development and reach out to Kathy Lear there. She would know about that and what kind of permitting was required. Is there any chance, so the next one, is there any chance to treat the reed canarygrass on the other side of the fence from the restoration site? I really hope so. We are talking about whether there's money available to scrape around it. You can see how dense it is. It really isn't practical for us to spray it. Now, if we could use herbicide on it, unfortunately, I have a very small crew, and this is only one small part of the project that we work on. We also do weed control for the rest of this 180 acres. We do weed control for the roadside. So unfortunately, even if we had the money and we don't have the money or the time to use herbicide around here, there may be money to scrape the remaining reed canarygrass around here. But the project is coming to an end and there are other obligations for that money. And so we'll see. But what my crew and myself are doing is we're walking around the area and mapping those reed canarygrass populations so that if money does become available to scrape, we'll know how much is out there and we can quickly get out there. But currently there isn't any plans to treat the reed canarygrass around there. Okay, so we have another question. So one of the groups that I work with finally received permission to survey a section of a creek. And we were wondering why the coho were not migrating upstream. And they're all being held back by reed canarygrass, and hoping to find a solution this summer. Shading seems to be the best answer long-term. So yeah, I've also heard from other organizations that they are saying that reed canarygrass is preventing salmon from using, especially the smaller streams. Shading is definitely a way to go. It's a lot cheaper, and it's important to think about what was there before. We don't want to make everything into a willow and cottonwood stand if it wasn't already there before. There are a lot of other really important plants, and the emergent wetland plants are really also important to have there. And shading, so oftentimes I see people put in willow stakes right into the reed canarygrass, and where that can work sometimes it's important to know what the water table is and know that if it was easy to get rid of this canarygrass, we would already have it all gone. The shading it out is very difficult, and it does require a lot of maintenance, going out there, making sure those plants survive, because even if you were to put willow stakes in, or you put in bare root plants and then you weed whack around it to get the above ground competition away, there's still a lot of below ground competition. And that's really the problem with canarygrass, is that there's no room for roots for any other plants there. They're really good at outcompeting that and preventing any other plants from getting established. So shading is definitely a way, and people have had success, but just know that you can't just stick willow cuttings in and then walk away. There's a lot more to it than that. Another person is asking about permitting, and then again, I wasn't involved in the permitting section, so I recommend people reach out to Kathy Lear with the Clallam County Department of Community Development. She was involved with that. Okay, so we've got somebody who just wanted to make a comment. So they went to a field day example of restoration in a wetland area that was under heavy cropping for over 100 years, and they still had the historical seed bank come back. So she recommends reaching out to the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District in Oregon and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to chat to them about what they were seeing. So that is really cool. That's really cool that those plants they're able to come back. It's really cool when we can use what's already there and we don't have to put in our own inputs. Restoration really does best working with the surrounding landscape, and so that's what we were able to do here, and that's what made it so successful. We could have put in plants, and we did, and those really didn't do as well as those native plants that were already there, and then the seeds that got brought in. So yes, so somebody says, I thought a Mazapir made it so plants cannot grow there for quite some time, but that was not the case here. Actually, it is the case. So a Mazapir, again, it has a long residual, so it will prevent anywhere that it's sprayed. It will prevent plants from coming back for, it's about a year on the Olympic Peninsula. But because we were just doing a spot spraying, and it didn't affect most of the site, just the little areas that we were spraying, and we kind of had to balance that out with the fact that a Mazapir really is the best chemical that we know to come back. Some of it, especially there were some tiny patches in the middle of the mitigation site. Those are coming from seeds. And so we did want to use the Mazapir because then it prevents new germination from canarygrass seeds. So yes, we do have little patches that don't have anything growing in it, but they're really small, and it really hasn't affected the mitigation site as a whole. Okay, so somebody's commenting, they did a lot of work on prairie and pasture grass restoration in South Sound prairies in the 2000s and 2010s. The conclusion is that pasture grass and degraded prairies do not have much native seed bank. Seeding plugging was essential to increase nativity in these upland sites. Anecdotally, adjacent wetland areas dominated by canarygrass had long absent native species pop up after a pipeline was installed through the area with significant soil disturbance. Not as dramatic as what you're showing, though. This varied response to topsoil removal really lends itself to a stage scale approach. Do a small test area, monitor response, and then expand if successful, and that these are really encouraging results. So yeah, I'm really glad to hear that we're not the only place that has had something like this, where this seed bank kind of pops back up again. Really inspiring. And I know, because it involves scraping and heavy equipment in wetland, that there's really a limited use for this. But if you're able to do it, I mean, what other way have we ever had native wetland come back in 5 months from an area that was dominated by canarygrass? That's kind of really unbelievable. Okay, so we've got the next question. What lessons were learned from the perspective of contracting best practices? Yeah, so I mean, certainly if you have somebody who's got a backhoe and you've got canarygrass around, that really is the best way to remove it. I know that herbicide is often used, and it's really the only option in many places, but if you have an opportunity to remove canarygrass by just scraping the top foot off, boy, does that really work well. And then we really talked to the contractor about moving, how they could possibly move around weed seeds, because of there were areas that they were working through that had poison hemlock, and that worked really well. The only thing that didn't work well is that topsoil from the footprint of the levee was then stored to be used to put on the sides of the levee. And that was why we had scraped that second site that had poison hemlock seeds. And that turned out not to work very well, and that topsoil still got contaminated. Again, it wasn't getting moved around by the equipment. It was just in the topsoil that had been stored that we thought was clean and then got put on the sides of the levee. So I have personally removed about 700, poison hemlock seedlings on the side of a levee. And my crew has done a lot more than that. So I would recommend that if you ever get a chance, make sure that you're using clean material all the time. It's not worth the expense if you think that topsoil might be contaminated. Using old topsoil is just always a bad idea. Okay, so someone's asking if the dead spruce are being removed, or we're just going to let them decay in place. I think they're just going to be left there. They're not really doing anything. Somebody's asking if I've considered using an electrical conduit trencher to dig a narrow 3-foot trench around the site's perimeter and bury a screwed together plywood barrier to block the rhizomes from traveling underground. Huh, I've never heard of that. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, again, if the reed canarygrass is only a foot underneath, then yeah, making a barrier would certainly prevent it from coming in. So that if we have a little bit of funding but not enough to scrape around, that might be a way to do it. I think the problem is because of how wet it is, that wood would degrade pretty fast, and there's so much reed canarygrass around it that at some point it's just going to move in. I don't know what the long-term future of the site is because it is surrounded by reed canarygrass, but I really hope that we can find a way to expand the site and make sure that it stays native for a long time. Somebody's asking, my last question is, how long did I wait after using a Mazapir before planting? So actually the Mazapir was used after planting. So it was not used anywhere where plants had been planted. But if you read the label for any Mazapir product, it will give you a date for how long you want to wait before planting. Personally, I would wait like an entire year, maybe even 2 years. But the Mazapir was, again, very spot spraying. So it did not interact with any of the planted plants. It was really just done in areas that had the reed canarygrass that was coming through. So very little of Mazapir actually got put out there, and it was very targeted to where the weeds were. All right, well, thank you so much. And I hope this mitigation project has inspired you as much as it has inspired me.